But there wasn't even a loan. We really, we being newly married, we went in business with your parents, and we were partners. And I know from our standpoint, we borrowed $5,000 from my parents.
And my dad and mom put in $5,000. And that's how we started Runk and Pratt, was $10,000.
Which seemed like a crazy number back in the day.
To us, that was a lot of money.
When you're 22, 23 years old, right?
Around the Table with Vickie. Just like gathering around the dinner table with loved ones and friends, we're here to share stories, insight, and inspiration.
Well, everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Around the Table with Vickie. I am your co-host, Chris Runk, and to my right is my mother, Mrs. Vickie Runk.
Hello, hello. Today, Christopher, we have your dad with us. Brian Runk is my husband, your father. Welcome.
Thank you.
I know this isn't anything you really love to do.
I love it.
We're going to catch you here and ask a bunch of questions, and we're just going to have a good time today. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Christopher.
Well, this show, we hope to explain and get into how Runk and Pratt came to be. And in order to do that, we had to bring in the heavy hitter, my dad. And because without him, there's no Runk and Pratt. And tell the story a little bit about how my mom and dad met and take us back to the very, very beginning.
Wow, that far back, huh?
You want to start?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, we met in college.
That's right.
At Liberty, at a movie.
At a movie.
It was called Iceman, right?
It was called Iceman.
Who would ever thought?
We weren't in a movie theater. LU back then had movies inside their common spaces, and that's where we were.
This was in the gym.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you and a friend of yours who I knew from class sat in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed this really good-looking blonde in front of me, and I knew that I had to sort of track you down. So we met there, and then I happened to be in places where you were at, and we met, and you were on the other side of campus. So once we actually started to talk some, it was always a mecca for me to have to walk from one side to the other.
And Liberty was much different back then, so we didn't have all the amenities that those kids have now. So there was a lot of walking. So all those buildings in between the two dorms now have built up, and it's the basketball arena that's just been the new DeMoss Hall that's so tall, and all the other buildings in between.
I don't think there's actually one building still left.
No.
That's there whenever we were there.
So that was back in 1985. And we were married in 88. Dr. Jerry Falwell Sr. married us at the Old Thomas Road Baptist Church, which holds special memories for us. And we began a family, which started with Christopher. And Christopher, you like to tell this part.
Well, I do like to tell everyone that I am the reason Runk and Pratt exist. Without me, there wouldn't be a Runk and Pratt.
Mm-hmm. So tell a little bit about, Brian, tell our listeners about how that all came to be.
Well, she had worked at a local nursing home when she was in school, and I graduated a year before her. So once she graduated, she still had this desire to work with seniors, and she was always passionate about sort of continuing what she had started, but she was pregnant and she wanted to be a mom. So she found this ad in the newspaper for this assisted living that was down in Spout Springs, Virginia, which is sort of in Appomattox.
And we didn't know where it was.
I didn't know where it was, but I came home one day, and I was working at a children's home then. So I was working with kids at the time, and she came home and she said, "We want to go see this place." So just like any good husband, I say, "Okay, let's go see it." So we went down the road, and I'm telling you, it was a hole in the wall. It was not something that you would see any potential in. It was a sort of an ugly green-looking building. And we went in there and we toured, and I could see as soon as we pulled in that you could see it in her eye that she had this passion for this. And the more that we talked to people, met the residents, and surprisingly enough, there was another group that was looking at this as well. It was a realtor that was doing some kind of realty thing with it, and it was us. Mm-hmm. And then you had to basically make a sales pitch to make this work. And
I did.
If you want to talk about how that worked, because really, that's really what got it done.
So there was a lady by the name of Mrs. Hawley. So if anybody's listening that remembers back 32 years ago, She had ran that little assisted living home in Spout Springs for a long time, and her granddaughter lived in California,
Right.
and she was brought in to help facilitate the sale of Spout Spring Home for Adults. That was the name of it back in
92.
1992. And the reason that I was looking to be an entrepreneur
Yep.
was because Christopher was born, and for the first 2 years, it was really hard for me to break away from being a mother to him and wanting to and needing. Like, I made half of our income, so I didn't have the option to stay home and be a stay-at-home mom. I had to work,
Right.
and so like so many now. Fast forward all these years, there's a lot of ways women can make money these days without having to leave their children. There's all the social media stuff, and you can become influencers, and there's things you can do at home. But back then, you will attest to this, it was not something that was easily done. You couldn't just stay at home. There was not much you could do other than sell Avon, which I was not good at.
That wasn't for you.
No. And so when I was reaching for the whole Spout Spring Home for Adults, it was truly to be with our child, who was 2 years old and beginning to be a little terror at home. He was always into something. And my mother had taken off for 2 years and been his babysitter. And so I wanted a way to be with him. I wanted to do it all, which women entrepreneurs really want. And having walked that road, I feel like they deserve it. We can do it all. We just have to have some support and strength. And so it was real important to me that I landed that deal that day, because it really meant whether I was going to be able to raise my own child or someone else raise him. And so that was the drive, that was the push to get me in that direction. I was already working with seniors, so I had a way of doing that, but I wanted to do it on my own. You remember me telling you that over and over again. I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to be a businesswoman. I want to have it all.
Yeah, and you've always been driven with that. So when that all happened at back in the day, you were very focused with that kind of things, and had a passion for that, and it just seemed like a good opportunity, sort of low risk. Your mom was going to help you. I was going to continue with my job. So, and you had made all these contacts within the skilled nursing world with placements and the hospital. So you really had paved the way for that kind of stuff.
Right.
So we felt like that this was a good opportunity to, dip our toes in the water and see what happened.
Make my dreams come
Exactly
true.
right.
So I went to Mrs. Hawley's bedside, which was it's still kind of hard for me to talk about because I remember it to this day. She lived in a little tiny house deep in the country of Spout Springs. Once we figured out where it was Appomattox County. And for those of you that listen all across Virginia and some of our podcasts, that is where Lee surrendered to Grant. Did I get that right?
The Civil War
ended. Civil War ended, and so it's a big place for history, and that's where the little home was located. And I walked into her front door, being accompanied by her granddaughter, and I knelt down next to her bedside and literally told her that I never will forget it. I was 24 years old.
Well, I think we kick back to the first episode, and you having a passion for seniors at a young age, and your only other job was being 21 and being the admissions director.
Yes.
So you knew you could already do it.
I knew I could do it, yes. But, that moment in time it was literally going to write our history. Yeah, I was at a pivotal moment to where, as I was kneeling next to her bedside, and she was looking in my eyes, and she was just a couple weeks from being able to cross into glory and celebrate her journey here on earth and heaven. And I knew that from working with seniors. I knew that she was not long for this world. And I can remember taking her hand and her looking in my eyes and said, "Honey, you're so pretty." And that was such a blessing to know that she saw me.
Yeah.
But more than that, she heard me that day. And I'm not so sure that she heard my words as much as she really heard the words of my heart.
Right.
And I remember telling her in only the ways that I knew how to tell her that I was being called to make a difference in Central Virginia for seniors, and that I didn't want to do it for somebody else, like a large company that I was working for, but I wanted to do it for my family. I wanted to do it for my child. I wanted to do it for our little 3 at the time, and then our parents as well.
I told everybody I started Runk and Pratt.
And I did the best I could with like sharing my heart and what the words God gave me. Well, there was another person that was after the purchase, the home, just like you said. So he was coming in behind me, and I think that it was finished the minute that I left. I don't even think that gentleman had a chance.
You have that impact on people anyhow. That's sort of how it works.
But more than that, it was God ordained.
Yeah.
This was something that God already had in his back pocket. And all the stress that I was going through trying to make sure that it happened for us as a family, God already knew. And he could see 32 years down the road now that we sit and celebrate today. But it was such a comfort to know that God had me. He had that deal in his back pocket. And that's just so cool, reflecting back on that today.
It seems like, and it was a long time ago, but, back then there was no lofty dreams of anything else. We just were looking for a way to make a living and for you to do what you love to do and to be a great mom. That was what it was all about.
That's right.
And you talk about entrepreneurship. I think it's important for listeners to know maybe the size of the loan you started with. I don't think anybody would even imagine that that's the number to where we are today.
Well, there wasn't even a loan. We we being newly married, we went in business with your parents, and we were partners. And I know from our standpoint, we borrowed $5,000 from my parents.
And my dad and mom put in $5,000. And that's how we started Runk and Pratt, was $10,000.
Which seemed like a crazy number back in the day.
To us, that was a lot of money.
When you're 22, 23 years old, right?
And really, my goal as a mom, and I always had everything figured out, right? I did. Say it.
She did.
She still does.
I just needed to make what I was making at the nursing home that I was working.
Right.
And you were still going to work at the children's home. So all I really needed to do was to turn enough profit so that hole that created, if I would have left the nursing home, could be met. And I had that figured out,
sure.
Right?
Yep.
And then I needed to be able to provide my mom with a salary as well, because she had been working at a local department store. And I needed to be able to pay her salary.
Right.
So with those 19 residents that were pretty much all government funded, right?
They were all government funded. They were all Medicaid.
So when I say that, for those of you that don't understand the industry in which we work, that means there was no private pay funds coming in. Nobody was writing the check for them to stay there, which meant we were operating on a cost that our state government had deemed appropriate for senior living, and that's how we would get paid every month.
For sure. Yeah. Seemed like such a long time ago. So many great memories, though.
That's right.
Yeah.
Some deep friendships and some of the most precious people, and just time that I think those first years just really created our business plan.
Yeah.
Even though it was only 19 beds, we knew that whatever we did in those early years would carry us and catapult us to a landing point somewhere, that we would have a program that could be something that we would take, and it would be intentional every time we did it, which was so much fun to do together.
And I think we just walked through doors as they opened up. Because I remember the day when you called and said you got a call from a lady looking to place 15 people.
Well, that goes to the next spot, right. Which, Christopher, you want to kind of introduce that?
You touched on it a little bit, of bringing in your mother, Nana, and working. I think people would like to know where the Pratt is from. Right. That's a question we get a lot, is who is Pratt?
Who is the Pratt? And sometimes, I'll joke and say to everybody, well, I am a Runk and a Pratt, which makes me the most important one and the one that holds all the keys to where the decisions are made. But all joking aside, it was Nana and Papa, Dr. Norman and Linda Pratt, who were young back then, and they were such an important, vital part of our history. And my dad, your papa, was a ordained minister, and he also was with the Air Force as a chaplain, and he had a heart for people. And I think that early on, I remember, growing up in churches with him and him being a minister and listening to a Wednesday night service and a Sunday night church service. Because back then, you had to go to church all the time. If you didn't go all the time, then you were going to be in trouble. So we went all the time. And just really watching him serve people. And Mom Nana being that pastor's wife that was always there to serve alongside of him, we were just that kind of family. And so when we jumped into this, much the same way, Papa would go around and see all the residents, and he was very well known for making sure that the building was all perfect. And if it wasn't, we would have a list the next day of what all we needed to do maintenance-wise. And I was so intent on caring for the residents. That was the least of my worries, but he had it all written down, and we had to go by his rules all the time. And Nana has always been a wonderful cook. And so back in Spout Springs day, she would do all the menus and meet with the inspector and make sure she was all on board with picking up her own groceries at the local Food Lion in Appomattox County. And it was just a wonderful time of beginnings.
It's where you got your feet wet, all the different things. I remember there's times we would get calls at night, somebody would call out, we would put our coats on, jump in the car, and
we would go
drive down. I remember cooking breakfast in the morning when I really didn't know how to cook, but they all loved it. And just doing what you had to do. We learned a lot from those times.
Well, and having said that, I think to the small business owners today,
yeah, you wear all the hats.
It's so fun to have some of them come into our office now. We've had plenty of people come and say, will you mentor us? And how fun that is for the two of us to sit and listen to their business plans and help them along the way. I know I'm thinking of several right now that I won't name, but it's just fun because you go back to those early beginnings and think, I remember that, and that's the mistake I made, and let's not do that. So we kind of put them on the right path. But small business it's a tough road, and we weren't small long though.
No, I think sometimes you just go by day, and you deal with what you're dealing with, and you at that point in time we were really content in what we had and where we were at. Your parents were super big help. Our family was doing well, and for us at that point in time we were happy.
So there came a point in Spout Springs' little history, it was only a 2-year history there, that you and I looked at each other and said, this is becoming bigger than who we are.
Which then led into being contacted one day, and I don't know her name, but a woman contacted you.
Isabel Hopkins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she said she had she needed placement.
She needed to place 13 women, is what she said to me.
By the end of the month.
By the end of the month. And your dad was still working at the children's home locally. And I had a little office that was in this little tiny house. It wasn't an office, it was a closet. And I didn't spend much time in there because I was taking care of those 19 residents along with caregivers that were there with me. But I was the administrator of that building.
How many employees?
We started with 9 employees. Yes. That's what he did payroll for. Yeah, at home. And I walked by that office and I heard a real phone that used to have dial on it ringing. Rotary. Okay. And I walk in to answer it. Spout Springs Home for Adults. How may I help you? And it's this little country lady, and she tells me, I need to place 13 women. Can you come down and look and see if you can take any of them? Well, thank God, I immediately said, why do you need to place 13 women? Can I ask you that? And she said, honey, I've been doing this for a long time and I'm tired.
Yep.
And I just knew in that moment it was something I needed to dig into. And so you were working.
Right. And
I had made an appointment to go see
that
very night. I'm pretty known for that.
You don't waste any time.
Don't waste any time. And we got in the car, and it was Liberty Manor Home for Adults.
Home for the Aged.
Home for the Aged.
Gotta get it right.
Right on. That sounds awful.
It does. And it does sound awful.
Liberty Manor Home for the Aging.
Yes. Aged.
That even sounds older.
And we drove up into us coming from Spout Springs.
It was the White House. It was incredible.
Moving on up to the White House.
We hit the big time.
And I just knew when we walked through that front door, that God was going to give us that building. I just knew it. I automatically just started. I went into my mode of how do we make this happen? And you're looking at me like, hold on, which
Chill out a little bit.
I'm always
It's a beautiful
the one.
Southern mansion.
A beautiful Southern
Built
mansion.
in 1848.
It only allowed women in it. You're talking about discrimination. I don't know how they got by with it back then. I don't think they spent too much time worrying about that. But we were the first owners that allowed a male
Right.
to stay there.
Groundbreaking, huh?
Groundbreaking. And we took down a big hill. There was a big hill in front of the house, and we wanted everybody to see that house because it is historic. Christopher, tell a little bit about what all the history is of what is now the Bedford Columns.
The Bedford Columns used as a wedding venue.
That's right.
For entwined events. It was built in 1848. Beautiful Southern mansion. Has a lot of war history. It was a Civil War hospital. And Walter Reed actually went to high school there. So it was a boarding school. And Walter Reed went to school there. There was a few private residents for a few folks after that. And they added on the columns and the porches and everything. And you guys bought it.
Right. And while we were getting that property, which happened very fast because she wanted to leave,
Right.
we then began to get our Leesville Road property because we knew Spout Springs needed to move. We needed to go from 19 beds.
Really, we wanted to buy it at the time because we
That's
thought we would buy this and we would stay here, but it never worked out to buy it. God had a plan for that. That was never in the cards for that to happen.
So you young entrepreneurs that are listening, just learn from us that if that door doesn't open, don't you beat it down because God's got a better door for you.
And we tried. We didn't understand why we couldn't. He was older. He was in bad health. And we're like, why don't you want to sell it? But we could not talk him into selling it. Now I'm thankful he never sold it.
So we found a moose lodge
Yeah.
that is on
Imagine that.
Leesville Road, which was near where we lived at the time, actually less than a mile.
Yeah.
And we began to start applications through.
Yeah, but the one thing about that is there was another group that was looking at
There's
that.
always another group in our story.
There was a church
The
group.
villains.
I know. Well, this is a church group. So we ended up, there was two of us. There was us and this church.
You were going against a church?
We were
We were going against
the
the church. Yeah, so we were thinking, man, we're going against a church, and that's not a good sign because they had to have a building. And I remember your dad would, go up and he actually would walk around the building
Well,
like
he
7
believed in
times.
the story of Jericho.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he would walk around and pray that this would be ours. And we went through all that. The biggest issue we had as young business people is just getting the money. We were young, barely 2 years old, and having people to believe in we could take something that was all Medicaid and grow this. So we had this great opportunity, but getting the funding, we were able to work out a deal with which is now the Bedford Columns. We got a really good deal with that. But then when it came for something bigger for Leesville Road at the time,
And that was kind of all going on at the same time.
Right.
Yes.
Because we were trying to buy Spout Springs, that didn't work out, and this opportunity to buy this Moose Lodge. But to us, it was like, it was a large loan. It was a big project.
So tell us about the day that you and I went to. You tell me the name of the HUD. What was?
Well, I discovered Virginia VHD, Virginia Housing Development Authority, and they had a loan fund, and you had to compete. They had $350,000, and there was 10 grants, and you had to compete, and it was scored, and you had to, if you got this loan, then you got the money, and it was low interest money, but it was all meant for housing, and the senior living industry fit into that. So I said I was going to take my stab at applying for this funding. And it was a process. I remember we had to have 3 big books, and I remember taking the pictures of the books, and they were,
But that's what you're so good at, and ended up being so good through the years. You've always been our financier and applied
the money man.
The money man.
So we actually took $350,000 from VHDA, and then the Virginia, the VHCD, which is the Department of Housing Authority. And they both had funds, and we competed, and we ended up getting both of those. But the VHDA
But what was it that
money,
day that you and I went to Richmond?
Yeah, there was a.
You remember that day? I don't like elevators.
Yeah, Vickie hates elevators. She's
Yes.
claustrophobic. So we went to Richmond, downtown Richmond, multi-story building. We
I had to do an
and we had to
elevator.
go up to the boardroom, and I said, "Baby, you can make this. You can
If
do
she
this."
can find a stairwell, she will.
Yeah,
Trust me,
yeah,
she will
well.
move heaven and earth to find a stairwell.
Guilty.
Doesn't matter how far she has
That's
to walk or how high.
Or how far you're going to have to walk
Well,
with
yeah,
me.
I'm normally behind her.
So we went down there. It was me and you and your dad, and we went down and we had a board meeting down there, and R.C. Moore was his name.
And you and Dad did your part, which
Right.
was the whole financial.
Yeah. So we were in this giant boardroom looking out over the river, over Richmond, just a bunch of young kids. And we did our spiel, and I went over all my numbers and what we could do.
And then you
and
called me in.
called you in, and then,
You looked at me, and I'll never forget. You said, "You need to bring it home now,"
yeah, you need to touch his heart.
which means that I had to be.
We call her the closer.
Yeah.
I had to be the one, and I can almost remember being in the boardroom chairs, and I felt like I couldn't reach the floor. I felt like I was just so little that
You
I
probably
couldn't
couldn't. You're
reach
short.
the floor. And I never will forget the delivery of a message that I gave that day, and looking in R.C. Moore's eyes and tears coming down his cheek. And I knew at that moment that God had done what I needed him to do too, which is, again, prepare the heart for those to be able to receive the message that we had. And so it's been so great to find people that believed in what our calling has been all these years. And back then, it was just so far-fetched because we were so young.
Yeah, it was. But to us, we never saw it that way. We knew we were driven and we were going to make this happen. And
But we knew
didn't
we
see
had
this
an
as-
intentional plan.
We definitely did. And I know that when we met with RC, I knew that when you were done, that you had touched his heartstrings. He did a lot of stuff to help us out. And they chose 10 people. And we came down to this last group, and we were looking with somebody else as the 10th finalist. I know that we ultimately were the 10th selection, and we got that $350,000. And that's, without that, we would have never got that building. And that's where things really started.
So we
for
had
us.
to call the church and
Yeah.
say, "You got to go find another
I know.
site."
Yeah, I
Yeah.
never would have thought we would have been, sort of one out of church, but there was
Yeah.
bigger plans for that.
So we took 19 beds from Spout Springs and moved them to Leesville Road, 20212 Leesville Road, which has been there for a long time for us. And we added on that building so many times. We pretty much
Well, the
maxed it
bigger
out.
story is on day one,
Day one.
you had pre-marketed, used all your contacts. And I think with the 19 that we moved, we had 43 people. I remember the night when we had, Liz and those guys helped us make the beds. The day before, there was a weird feeling. You're in there and the building's completely empty, and you're walking down the hallways. And the next morning, you're having a bus bringing up and dropping people off, and they were so happy.
I remember selling those beds in unfinished spaces
Yeah.
where I was standing with a family on a concrete floor, and the steel beams that were being put up, I didn't have any way of being able to tell them this is what you're. Back then, we didn't do any of that. I mean, I'd pick the selections for the furnishings and stuff like that. I could show them, but we didn't have any big marketing plans back
Right.
then. Nobody was in the director of marketing position for us to pull from.
Yeah.
We could have colored it, I guess, but we didn't have any way of doing any of that back then. And taking 19 people and bringing them from Spout Springs, and then literally the night before, like you said, being in a building that I'd always dreamed of.
A real building.
A real building.
A real building.
I mean, Spout Springs was a house. And so
Yeah.
going to a building, and I made sure that with our care aides, I helped make every
Right.
bed in that facility, and I wouldn't have changed that for the world.
Right.
It was during those moments that I realized that God loves us. He wants to see our dreams come to life. He is on our side, and He is there to grant the desires of our heart. And if He's called you to do it, He will see you through it, and He'll give you the means to do it.
Right. So true.
And even though we were 26 years old when that happened, I felt an innate voice from God that said, "This is my house. These will be my people, and you will serve as I've directed." And it just was a overwhelming feeling. And it feels so good to revisit those moments today. And then shortly after that, the Bedford Columns, you're talking about how much money did it cost to get in there? Literally, we paid $75,000 for that house. And it's appraised today for over $2.4 million. And again, a gift from God. Faithfulness. We want to talk about faithfulness when we go through our story, and we'd say sometimes we didn't even realize what we were signing. Okay, everybody, we've had to cut for the time being, but we're going to part 2 next week, and we want you to join us as we continue talking about our faith journey and our growth at Runk and Pratt Companies. See you next week.